Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Winkler here. I've not done one of these videos in a while. There's a lot of big changes coming up in QRadar, and I've quite frankly had to wait for some of those to arrive before we can get dirty and talking about them. But I want to take a minute here today, and I want to talk about getting beyond hardware. I started working for IBM, a little less than 5 years ago now, and everything we did originally was about hardware and sizing and all of that good stuff, right? But we don't live in that world anymore from 5 years ago. There's virtual instances, there's a lot of different hardware platforms, there's a lot of sharing, there's Amazon, there's Azure, beyond and beyond and beyond, okay? So I want to take a minute and I want to talk about different ways we can assemble QRadar depending on your workload and your platform needs. Okay. So I went through and I was talking to some of my product guys, and they were telling me about AWS. And he gave me this whole list of things, each that came with their own cute icon, of things we can pull out of Amazon Web Services to pull into a QRadar. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And I was trying not to make this too complicated, so I drilled this down and I looked at it, and I discovered really that long list of things comes down to infrastructure and applications, right? I do want to know, and I do want to forward to my QRadar the infrastructure things, like is there someone trying to manage my AWS sessions from a country where I don't do business, or just a person that shouldn't be doing it, as well as all of the standard stuff that lives inside the applications. This started to look very familiar, right? But even beyond that, I came down to CloudWatch logs and VPC flows. Now, CloudWatch logs, we might as well just say syslog, just rejiggered for 2019 and beyond. And VPC flows are one of those things that has become weirdly important. We have always gathered NetFlow, and anyone that's a fan of my videos, you will see that I've been talking about the value of NetFlow for years. Where your Amazon is a bit of an undiscovered country that changes a lot. And even if you've been with it since the very beginning, there's always going to be things that change tomorrow morning and the next day that have you so that you're not caught up on things. It's a very dynamic environment. It's one way that cloud is very different from on-prem. If we are looking at the virtual private cloud flows, or VPC flows, something like these big breaches that we've been seeing, like happen to Capital One and some of these other folks, would I be able to stop it? No, but I could tell you it was happening in under 3 minutes, and I think that that's valuable, right? But just kind of to go back up, we look at our AWS, and I've got infrastructure, I've got application, I've got flows, I've got logs. This is the new boss, same as the old boss. Okay, so the way we did this up until last April, and this still works and there's still times it's the best way to do it, is I have CloudWatch logs and I push them down to QRadar, right? And this uses the syslog protocol, costs you about 7 cents per gig, or the same price for pulling any other data out of your AWS, and it allows us to get those logs and pushes them down into your QRadar. All well and good, still works, still there. There's still a few cases where it's the best, but we've come up with a couple of better ones, okay? There are times where you're getting a lot of data out of your CloudWatch, right? So in those cases, to get it to your QRadar, we will take an event collector and we will put that up inside your AWS. And there's some specific cost to this, but we've discovered as soon as you start getting 3,000 or 4,000 events per second, the value of compressing the data via the event collector and sending it down to the QRadar exceeds any cost, okay? So it becomes a better use of your bandwidth, thus your bandwidth dollars, to throw an event collector up there. And there's a weird little edge case that if you're pulling things from Linux or Windows agents directly, there are sometimes this doesn't get forwarded correctly via CloudWatch, just is what it is. In those cases, an event collector is still your best answer, okay? And for those of you keeping track of the exact names, this is the AWS protocol and the Guard Duty DSM. Still there, still good. And there's some cases where it's still the best answer, but we're moving to a lot of other answers at this point. Okay, so we're trying to get those VPC flows that I talked about just a couple of minutes ago, as well as our CloudWatch logs, right? Amazon now uses an S3 bucket and something called the SQS queuing system, which I think is the most awkward thing ever to say out loud. Don't worry too much about that. But what this is for a tiny fraction of a cent additional, that is to say 9/1000ths of a cent more than you were already paying, we can use this S3 bucket, right? And we'll get all of those logs and all of those flows down to QRadar. Now, what's cool about this, okay, is we can gather those flows, and it's a lot more efficient than it was coming the old way, right? So one of the problems we've had with getting data out of these clouds is it tends to be lumpy. So this is going to smooth that out for you some. We're going to get the flows because this is QRadar requesting the data of AWS when the data is available, okay? And this is the S3 protocol and the CloudTrail DSM. Now, what's particularly cool about this is it's multi-region and multi-instance. So if I have a lot of Amazon accounts, right, I might have 900 instances. I might be in 14 regions, and I want to add them all at once. The old way to do this was kind of painful to get the data to come down from your Amazon into your QRadar. But the new app to do this, right, and make sure that you have the new log source app when you are doing this, makes it so you can grab them all in one fell swoop, okay? This is kind of a big deal difference, and this is our current recommendation. Now, what's changing very soon, and I mean, call it before the end of the year, is something called Kinesis Streams. Now, Kinesis is something Amazon will charge you extra for, okay? So don't get me wrong, you're going to pay additional money to Amazon to use Kinesis Streams, but this is going to get you your VPC flows and your CloudWatch logs in real time. Okay, so this is the quickest way, the most streamlined flow to get the data, but it's going to cost you more money, and I will have this probably by the time you watch this video. Okay, so just kind of to summarize a little bit, CloudWatch logs use the AWS protocol, the GuardDuty DSM, and they are good. Okay, if I want to get VPC flows as well as my CloudWatch logs, I'm going to use that S3 API and the SQS queuing system, which I hate to say, and this gets you the value of those flows, and flows are so important in a less monitored environment. Okay, and if I want to get these kind of in the fastest, most streamlined, most together way that Amazon can offer, this is Kinesis Streams. It's expensive, it's fast, and I'm going to have it soon. That is coming soon, guys. It is coming very soon. Okay. That was Amazon. I want to take a minute to talk about Azure at this point. Azure is so similar in some ways and so different than others, so that makes some of this, we have to pick through some very exacting details. Okay, so Office 365 is the #1 thing that people want to get out of their Azure. And they want to get the data into the QRadar. This is the Microsoft Office 365 Management APIs. There is more than one. And it's actually relatively straightforward as long as you're using the new log source app. You need your session key, you add to it, great, have a nice day. And this is going to pull down all of that Office information. We found that this has been great for finding kind of poor man's DLP. I can tell you where that data is going from a given user, not just who he mails it to, but who the user also puts the data, in what it goes to in their OneDrive or into other resources. Allows you to spot a lot more what's going on. And it allows you to spot certain data problems before they occur. So this is valuable, as well as all the old school stuff about antivirus and these things that we've done for all these years. What we've discovered, and this is where Microsoft is a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky on the nomenclature, is there's a lot of other things that will come down through the Security Graph API and the Event Hub protocol, including some of these things that are Office things, right? The second biggest log source from the beginning of time, probably till the end of time, is always going to be your authentication data. And Microsoft is pushing pretty hard to get Active Directory into the Azure cloud at this point. So if you're trying to get some of these extended Office things, if you're trying to get Active Directory, you're going to use that Event Hub protocol and the Security Graph API. But beyond that, you will see that there's VTAP. VTAP is Azure's version of VPC flows, except it is a full packet capture, of which we don't need most of it, right? But if we want to look at those all-important net flows inside Azure, we can put either directly or with a collector, pull those down, okay, via VTAP, and we can pull the flows down to your QRadar. And this is the current state of the art with Azure. But here's the thing. Things change so fast, and this is true of both Amazon and Azure, but particularly about Azure, is we have a drop every 2 weeks of the DSM because things change so darn fast. So if you're trying to get something out of your Azure cloud that you can't get out of there, reach out to your QRadar engineer or whoever it is you talk to over there. Drop me a line if you can't find your guy and say, hey, can we get this protocol or that? And most of the time is, yeah, you can, but if not, if you're looking for something and someone else is looking for it too, it's going to be something that's coming up quickly, and we'll get that on the map for you, right? So it's pretty quick stuff to do, okay? Just like with AWS, This is multi-region and multi-instance, right? I'm going to say again, make sure you are using the new log source management tool because it is a big deal, but it allows you to add everything at once. Okay. So Google Cloud is the newest guy we are playing with over at QRadar. This is largely the G Suite or hosting things up on top of your Google Cloud, okay? So if you want to go through and you want to put an event collector up there to grab stuff from your Google Cloud, like we talked about with Amazon, we certainly can. Or if you're using G Suite, okay? And because there's only a certain number of customers on it, I have to call it early access at this point. It is a fully formed app. It's not like a beta or anything. Okay, but if you're using G Suite, I can pull all that G Suite data. And if you want to put a collector up there or even a full QRadar, you absolutely can, okay, to pull that data down like we've been talking to everywhere else. Now, Google is the newest one, so I only have so much data on the details of it, but this is the current state of the art. Okay, so now that we've gotten through that, I wanted to talk about a couple of architecture specifics, right? That was a lot of conceptual stuff. So let's say you want to hang a relatively small QRadar. 5,000 EPS, 200,000 flows, right? A relatively small, medium-sized enterprise, right? This isn't a small business thing. So what this would mean is I would want a hardware capacity, and this is based on how we build QRadar appliances, of 6.5 terabytes, 64 gigs of RAM, 16 cores. Which means if you wanted to put it in VMware, it's 800 IOPS, and 500 megs per second data transfer rate to get nice performance for 5,000 EPS and 200,000 flows per minute. Okay, fair enough. Now what this means, and this is kind of a side note, is Google at this point is asking for essentially VMware specs. So if you want to hang this in your Google Cloud, that's the specs you want. Okay? If you want to put it on hardware, IBM's glad to sell you an appliance. This is a 3105 all-in-one, and those are the specs for that 3105. If you want to hang this in your AWS, this is an AWS M4.4 large image, right? Same hardware specs. I talk about a couple of lines up. Or in Azure, it's an E16 v3. Once again, same specs. These are all identical from the point of view of IBM. So that if you want to run this kind of mid-sized business, right, a small QRadar, you want to put it in VM, there's your specs. You want to put it in Google, it's the same as the VM. If you want the Amazon or Azure, there are your instances. And obviously, if you want to go old school and you want a box, there we have it for you. So let's scale this up a little bit. Let's say up to 15,000 events per second and 30,000 flows per minute. And this is going to take care of a decent proportion of my customers because this is a good size enterprise, right? So I can say that's 128 gigs of RAM, 24 cores, 70 terabytes, or the current IBM appliance if you wanted to buy it from us. If you wanted to put this in your VMware or you wanted to hang it in a Google Cloud, 1200 IOPS, 1000 megs per second. I've written all this down, guys, because I know I'm hitting you with a lot of numbers pretty fast. Okay, but let's go through and let's look at that and what those formats mean. This would be buying a 3129 appliance from my guys, and you can get this capacity. And that's great. If you wanted to put it in AWS, and I couldn't find a perfect fit, right? But an AWS M4.10 is a little larger than these specs, and I could get as much as 30,000 events per second off it, right? And when I went, I couldn't find a perfect Azure either, right? So just the appliances didn't line up perfectly to the instance sizes. But if you had an Azure E20 v3, right, the hardware specs are right there, I would expect 10 to 15,000, excuse me, 15 to 20,000 events per second off that. So guys, what I'm trying to say here is, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, we were very tied to our hardware and our way to do it, right? And okay, all well and good. Now I'm saying that anywhere you want to put your QRadar functionality, we can put it there, right? You just tell me what form factor you want, and we'll mix and match them to your heart's content. Also, very specifically, I have not talked about any of the upcoming features with things like the Kubernetes, okay, and the new ways that we're designing the architecture and the back end of that, mostly because I'm expecting to do another video on that early next year. Okay, so I am Mike Winkler, and this has been about getting beyond your hardware in QRadar. Thanks.